Hello, welcome to the Flute 360 podcast, where we incorporate a panoramic view of flute-related topics. I am your host, Heidi K. Begay, and this is episode 54, Tips for Doublers with Dr. Ellen Kaner.
This is Paula Mims from Texas Flute Society. I am so excited to invite you to our 2021 Virtual Flute Festival on May 6th through 8th, 2021. Our guest artists are Jennifer Grimm, Jennifer Gunn, George Pope, Yi Shang, and Brian Allred. The virtual festival will feature our annual competitions, Myrna W. Brown Artist Competition, Donna Marie Harry Young Artist Competition, and the Masterclass Competition. We're also hosting a virtual solo ensemble for flutists of every level to play for a professional clinician and receive feedback. This year, we are offering the option of playing on live video or sending in a recording. The virtual festival has a total of 31 events, which include 7 flute choirs and various workshops and recitals. For more information about the festival, please visit our website or find us on Facebook and Instagram. We hope to see you at the Texas Flute Society Virtual Flute Festival on May 6th through 8th, 2021.
Welcome, everyone, to another Flute 360 podcast episode. Today we are talking with Dr. Ellen Kaner, who is a flutist, but specializes in other woodwind instruments. She is also a teacher in the Arlington, Texas area, a trustee for the Texas Flute Society, a site manager for Flute Fire, and a chamber coach for the Fort Worth Youth Orchestra. Welcome, Ellen.
Thank you very much. It's great to be talking with you.
Yeah, thank you for carving out time in your busy schedule for myself and the podcast and for all the listeners. We are so excited to pick your brain about this topic.
Great. It's great to be here.
Great. So tell me what you have done on your Sunday afternoon/morning. You were talking about hiking earlier.
Well, I love to hike or walk, and I hate to plan a hike when there's a lot of rain in the forecast because then that's going to be too muddy. But there are several parks and hiking areas, in and around Arlington, and I commit to always exercising on a weekend morning and at least 3 of the weekdays.
Nice. Excellent. What's your favorite hike path in the area?
It's kind of a toss-up between River Legacy Park in North Arlington and the Cedar Ridge Preserve and Cedar Hill State Park that are down just slightly south of I-20, south of Dallas.
Awesome. Great. Yeah, we were talking earlier before lunch how Eric and I also hike, and we like to pass in Saginaw. So
great. Well, yeah. I'm open to trying those as well.
Yeah, great. So getting into today's topic, I think first and foremost, it's important for the listeners just to know a little bit about who you are, your musical background. So could you please share that with everyone?
Well, I grew up just outside of New York City. So, of course, I was very aware of musicians in the city, not just the major orchestras and so forth, but that people played in Broadway show pits. So I actually had a flute teacher in high school that played both flute and clarinet and did some pit work. I think during the time I studied with him, one of the years he was playing Pippin, and one of the years he was playing The King and I. So I was very aware of that as a possible career path, even though I wasn't necessarily thinking of it for myself.
Yeah.
But for college, I went to Yale and kind of majored in music just because I got halfway through and I had more credits in music than anything else. And I still didn't really envision a specific career. And then as a senior, I was almost in a crisis as to what to do because my degree was just a BA in music with no official specialization, where I had practiced and played a lot, but there wasn't actually possible to get an undergraduate performance degree. So I thought about, well, would I be good enough to do a master's in flute performance? I started practicing for auditions and so forth. So the little bit that I had played on clarinet and sax got kind of packed up and put away my senior year of college, and I auditioned and got into maybe 3 different choices of where to go for a master's in flute performance. Went to East Carolina just because that came with a big teaching assistantship. Then was in a complete crisis as to what to do when I got that degree, and almost accidentally went to a place that was really wonderful, which was Florida State. So I have a master's in flute performance from East Carolina and a doctorate in music in flute performance from Florida State.
Oh, wow. Thanks for sharing that. And I can relate a lot because my undergrad was the same degree, a Bachelor of Arts in Music. and it wasn't specialized in specifically flute performance. But I'm really glad I went that route because just my minor in French and a lot of the humanities courses that I was required to take for my BA, and then that gave me kind of a broader degree, I guess, per se, just to get to dabble a little bit more here and there in the other art classes. And then I really knew, oh, I want to go and pursue specifically flute related, things like performance. And so when I went to go get my master's, I did a lot of flute performance with Dr. Danette McDermott. But yeah, so just that similarity with the BA resonates with me.
Yeah, I think also just taking pride in how we do in our classes that aren't music classes is maybe a common thread between us. And I find now little side things that I do, like I've written a lot of grants for Texas Flute Society. Well, you have to be able to write an essay. And
Yeah.
You have to be able to create a budget and so forth. And I think if I had been very music focused and only doing other things just so I could check a box off, I might not be as good at those things.
Yeah, completely. I agree. Perfect. Well, thank you for that background. So, kind of segueing into today's topic, and you mentioned clarinet and saxophone with that introduction, what lent you to learning the quote unquote other instruments?
I think it started for the wrong reasons, but it did turn out well. I think I was getting to about the end of 8th grade and playing flute, and I practiced a lot, but I don't think I had the right teacher. So I think I was sort of bored with how I was practicing because I was just turning pages of a book, not really working on categories like tone and articulation and so forth. And so I think being bored with flute made me want to, try somebody's old clarinet who had quit band and go borrow it and start playing around with it. And I did that the last couple weeks of 8th grade. I was about to go off to a music camp where I could do music almost the whole day. So there was room in my schedule during that summer and the next 3 at 2 different music camps where I would actually take lessons on both instruments, flute and clarinet. I could find an ensemble spot on flute for a couple of periods a day, but then there would also be like a clarinet choir, or maybe one summer I'd play flute in the orchestra, play clarinet in the concert band, and just get that different perspective. And since there were a lot of hours in the summer day, I could do that. And I was moving along my clarinet skills, so they were just, a couple of years behind my flute skills. So I really could play both reasonably well by the end of high school.
Oh, nice. So then, because of your boredom with flute and picking up the other instruments, did you find that the boredom kind of went away on flute because you got to be creative with the other instruments?
Well, I think I finally realized with the high school director hinting that I needed another flute teacher that there was a whole other way to practice flute. So by 11th and 12th grade, I had a much better idea how to work on tone and work on technique and not just work on the piece I was playing or the page I was up to in the book. But I think I maybe had, in some ways, a better start on clarinet because I had lessons with a better teacher closer to the beginning. But still, bad habits can crop up on any instrument at any time.
Yeah, that's really interesting. During our lunch, I was telling you that I had talked with Gary Shocker for NFA Archives and Oral History project, and one of the topics he was mentioning was boredom in playing. And he said there is something wrong with your practice session if you're bored. You have to jazz it up, mix it up, find something, because if you just go through the motions, then a lot of negative and maybe poor habits can formulate because of that. But yeah, we talked about boredom and how to defeat boredom in practicing.
Yeah, I agree with that. That's really important.
Yeah, great. So what are the different reasons then and purposes of being a doubler?
Well, I would say it's 3 different things, although they overlap a little. I mean, one is to be prepared to teach younger students. So maybe 1 or more of your degrees is or is going to be in performance, but you want to have some sort of teaching other than just flute lessons. Like either you want to be a band director where they're hiring like a woodwind specialist and a brass specialist and percussion specialist, or you want to just be able to teach lessons on more than one instrument just to fill your schedule. And so that would be focusing on the early fundamentals of that second or third instrument, making sure you know how to start a beginner, making sure you know what kind of equipment to use with a beginner and what kind of method book and so on and so forth, and how to troubleshoot problems that come up within the first year or 2 or 3. So that's one purpose in being a doubler, just kind of working with kids in the schools, working with kids outside of their school in lessons, and just having a little more versatility to, fill your load and your income and so forth. And then, kind of a second reason would be if you envision yourself maybe teaching at a junior college that can only have 1 or 2 woodwind teachers instead of 5 or more, or a university that's in a more remote area that has a smaller program, and so they want the flutist to be able to guide the oboes or the saxophones or whatever. And that's a little bit different focus, because that would require knowing some intermediate and advanced literature on the various instruments. So if you say you're going to be a woodwind specialist, maybe you can play 3 or more woodwinds at different levels, but then you'd also make sure that you knew some literature that was maybe above your own level of playing on one of those, and maybe even knew the literature on some of the ones where you don't play at all, and then just kind of troubleshoot the fundamental problems as they come up. You may only have that one oboe student every couple of years at that junior college or that rural university. So that's sort of a second reason. And then the third reason would be like actually doubling for things like shows, Broadway show type work. And of course, you can be more than one or all 3 of those things, but I think, for a young doubler who's just thinking about getting started, kind of knowing which one of those 3 or which second one they're looking at, I think would be important, because that would determine how you would choose other people to guide you and resources to guide you.
Awesome. Yeah, just to kind of comment on all 3, just you saying being more marketable and versatile to help the students, at the beginner level is so important. And second, when you talked about the community college, I couldn't agree more, because one of the inspirations behind this series was and is, when I'm applying for these different faculty positions, I'm seeing flute specialist or flute professor, but 50-50, the other hand or the other side of the coin is I will see a lot of job announcements about woodwind specialists. And it's coming up, through and through. And it's a really hot topic. And I remember back in 2003, 2004, when I was studying flute with Brian Lewis at the University of Arizona, he said, one day these woodwind specialist jobs will be popping up more frequently than they are now. And there will come a time when these colleges aren't hiring just a flute professor, oboe professor down the line, but one woodwind specialist. And I'm seeing all these job announcements and how that trend is becoming a reality. So I think that's really important that you mentioned that. And then the third thing with the musicals, it's funny because this series, I don't have a lot of insight into, because I'm not a doubler. The closest thing I have with this is playing piccolo, and how you have to change the voicing between flute and piccolo and different fingerings and things like that. But working with like Seussical, the musical in Lubbock, my friend and colleague, John Rice, he was picking up every instrument but the flute and piccolo, and just seeing how, he got that gig because he knows oboe, clarinet, saxophones, like all the saxophones. It was like he has soprano, alto, bari. And I thought the only reason why they hired me for flute and piccolo was because he literally did not have any more room for 2 more instruments. But yeah, I think all 3 of those points are so valid, because I see it throughout my life, and just bringing that information to students is very valuable.
Yeah, and it's fun too, once you make your choice and get into the work.
Yeah, definitely. So could you please give the multi-instrumentalist out there advice on how you would go from flute to clarinet? The Strawbringer Flute Company is a sought-out maker of fine flutes and pads. Located in Indianapolis, Indiana, the company celebrated their 50th anniversary in 2018. The Strawbringers contribute to the community with new ideas, concepts, and raise the bar to new heights for all flutists. Strawbringer flutes are known for their brilliant mechanism, beautiful tone colors, and outstanding craftsmanship. If you would like more information about Strawbringer Flutes, please visit their website at strawbringerflutes.com.
So it's been a long time since I first encountered that, but I was thinking that there are three main differences. I mean, the embouchure is really super obvious. You know, you're going to be curling a little bit of your lip over lower lip over your teeth to play the clarinet, and then you're going to be putting the instrument in your mouth as opposed to not. And when that lower lip is curled over your teeth and you have the pressure of the clarinet on your lower lip, you are working against some of the muscles you've worked on for that flute embouchure. So you later on, when you're practicing them both and getting ready to perform, you're going to have to think about the negative there. But initially, just developing that clarinet embouchure, that's brand new, totally different. And then, of course, the finger coordination is very similar, even though only about a third of the fingerings are actually the same and another few are close. And there's a chunk that are different. They're like a fifth off, like the difference between soprano and alto recorder. But the other big thing finger-wise is with your left index finger, you're operating the A key and the A flat key on the clarinet. You've got that finger at an angle. You're using a part of that finger that you're never using to press a key on the flute. And so all those passages, like F major arpeggios that are going quickly, FAC, with that A key, and say the F minor arpeggio, FA flat C, all that motion with that finger is going to be brand new. And as a primary flutist and secondary clarinetist, that part of your technique is going to lag a little bit behind, and you're going to have to practice extra and catch it up a little bit. So that's sort of the second thing that's different after the embouchure. And then the third thing that's different is the way the air flows when you play staccato is very, very different between the flute and the clarinet. And I really had to get a clarinet specialist to tactfully tell me that I was not teaching staccato well on the clarinet at all. And my students were not making good sounds and good note lengths when they needed to play like the shortest lengths that the band directors needed in the section. So I had to get one of my favorite clarinet specialists to sit down with me and say, okay, this is how I started a student on how to play a really good staccato on the clarinet. And so now I have like that set of exercises incorporated into my teaching, and I have like a certain time that I started with the students, and then depending on how they're doing, they may only be playing those exercises in the lesson for a few weeks, or it may be a couple of years if I don't hear that staccato going well in the context of their music. But that's kind of a really important difference between the two instruments that I had to get the hang of.
Wow. So how is it different?
Well, on the flute, at least the way I play it, and you can disagree if you'd like, you're the boss here, but I'm doing staccato with separate puffs of air. I mean, there may not be a lot of time in between. We're talking about little split seconds, but when I'm playing staccato on the clarinet, if I'm doing it right, the air is actually flowing up through my body the whole same way it would during a slur or legato, but my tongue is actually, tip of my tongue is going to the tip of the reed, and it's actually closing off the sound during the silences. So I'm actually blowing during the silences, but you're not hearing sound because my tip of my tongue is going to my reed and it's staying on there during the whole silence. So whether it's a very slow or whether it's going up to a certain speed. And then when you get to a really fast speed, you can't really do that anymore. And there's not that much difference between staccato and legato at really fast 16ths at 144 or something. Well, that's wishful thinking. I can't play that fast. But yeah, so that's a really important difference that I finally got the hang of, after a couple decades.
That's fascinating. And when you're talking about, the F arpeggio and just how like that one finger is going to be a little bit slow and sluggish coming from flute because you're not used to using it. When you transfer back to flute, do you find like, I know we're not, what finger was it again specifically?
So it's your left index finger.
Left index finger.
Yeah, it's not going to cause any problem on flute. It's just a matter of, the speed that I've practiced as someone who went to grad school for flute and practiced 3 or 4 hours a day on members of the flute family, whether it be flute, piccolo, baroque flute, whatever. All that technique will carry over, the coordination will on clarinet. It'll carry over onto some of the same where the fingerings are the same, and it'll also carry over into the low part of the clarinet, the shallow register, where the fingerings are like a fifth off, but still the coordination is the same, even though you got to transpose a little bit to get used to reading those notes as a different note name and reading below the low C. But the coordinate, it's a new area of coordination with the left index finger. It's just not going to hurt your flute playing to go back and not have to do that.
I wasn't thinking it was going to hurt, actually, but the coordination is a key word. And I was thinking I could imagine that it would actually help my flute technique.
I don't know if it would help, but just, of course, any kind of practice you do to coordinate can't hurt.
Okay.
I'll go with that.
Yeah, interesting. So going from specifically clarinet to alto saxophone, what are your tips there?
Well, I was kind of naive going in. I mean, I finally decided I want to go back and try some saxophone again when I was close to 40 years old. And I was like, look at that. You've got the single reed, the ligature. It looks just so similar. And look at that person's saxophone embouchure. It looks almost like clarinet. Okay, it's not as firm, or, your corners of your mouth are not going to get as tired as easily, but it's just going to be easy. It's just going to be the same. And so I started playing the saxophone, and some of it works out okay. Probably from about fourth line D to the C above that, almost an octave worth of the saxophone. You can play it pretty decently with a decent sound, just coming off your clarinet. Just put it in your mouth and go, as long as you have a reed that's about the right strength, But I realized after a couple or 3 years of struggling with saxophone that, okay, I need a little more help here. How are we going to get those lower notes to come out consistently? And how are we going to keep those altissimo palm key notes from being like super sharp? And so around that time, I, luckily have some really nice friends who play the saxophone, and there's always, can we exchange a dinner and a lesson here? And so I have my sort of go-to saxophonist to help me with different problems. And one of them, my friend David, has been really good about helping with what the differences are between clarinet and sax. And a lot of it goes to the angle of your tongue inside your mouth, your middle and your back of your tongue basically have to be pretty high inside your mouth to get a really nice clarinet sound. But on saxophone, that angle is actually going to vary, and it's not going to be that consistent angle, but it's going to work in that little part of the range that I mentioned, kind of almost.
Yeah.
But then you're going to have to vary the angle of your tongue to get the altissimo notes not to be horribly sharp and to get the lower notes to start speaking more consistently.
Huh.
And so that's an important difference, kind of an internal thing that you don't really see if you're watching a clarinet player and an alto sax player.
Right.
It looks pretty similar, but hidden behind that, you've got some differences.
Huh. And just hearing you talk about, these three instruments, my brain is going to how much, I don't know, because you are first and foremost a flutist, I would imagine that knowing and not just dabbling, but really researching and learning these different instruments inside and out makes your flute playing that much better. Like, I understand how the embouchure could really affect, if you're not too careful in a bad way, but I would imagine that you're learning how to use your tongue different, your mouth different, your fingers different, and because of that, it's actually helping you improve as a flutist. Because you're approaching things in a different way, and your brain is having to work on a whole different level. Would you kind of agree with that?
Yeah, there's definitely things where I've improved something on one of the others, and then I've gone back to flute and thought, how could I apply this? Like, one thing, I was playing a musical that I've actually played 3 different times, Drowsy Chaperone, but I've played 3 different books the 3 different times. And all 3 times I had to play a ton of really fast chromatic stuff on the saxophone, and realized, I don't know that chromatic scale anywhere near as well as I know it on a flute or clarinet. And I need to practice that more regularly and not just wait around until I get that show book. And so I started taking this, kind of band book that has the same kind of chromatic exercises for all three instruments and realizing that if you play the chromatic scale, if you play it from D to D and turn around to D, and then you play it from D sharp to D sharp and turn around there and play it from E to E, how much better you know it, that you keep sliding over the notes to a different position in your triplet or a different position in your group of 16th notes, that you'll really know it better when you get done doing that a whole bunch of times. So where I didn't really need to do it on flute or clarinet for myself, I then realized that my flute and clarinet students could benefit from the exercise that I needed so badly on saxophone because it was third on my list. So yeah, things do come kind of back in a circle and help you out.
Awesome.
Definitely.
Very cool. So is there a particular exercise that you would like to share to help facilitate the changes between certain instruments?
Yeah, I think it's really helped. Again, my friend David, who had some exercises, some of which he may have invented. On alto sax, if you play just the mouthpiece, it's supposed to sound like a concert A. And several saxophonists have told me that. And my tendency coming from clarinet is that it always sounds a few steps higher if I'm not careful. And just getting it to sound like an A and making it stable, something a lot of saxophonists do and really helps. But what David always has his students do is bending the pitch on the mouthpiece, going up and down. And so, he would have me do the A and then do like a Remington of, the A, the G sharp and the A, and then the A and the G and the A, and then A and F sharp and A. And then when you get through with a few of those, then just kind of scoop it up and down in a gliss and come back to the A. And then, a little bit scooping up. But for me, the down made more of a difference because I was trying to grab the mouthpiece too tightly because I'm playing more hours of clarinet.
Okay.
But, a few times when I've gone to judge solo and ensemble and they've just thrown just a few sax players in my room just to fill out the schedule, and they may be playing literature that I don't know, but several times I've said, hey, have you ever tried this? And the kid has really appreciated the tip. And, and I would tell them what specifically to help with, like, okay, your altissimo notes are kind of sharp, or you had a low note that didn't speak or whatever. And, it's a really quick tip that, a kid who's come to solo and ensemble who isn't taking private lessons can really benefit from. And, wherever there's a school where David and I both teach, I'll be approaching the band hall. And even with the whole band warming up at once, I'll hear a whole bunch of those sax players doing that. And it really, really helps. And, there's some other things related to it. You can also take the individual palm key notes like the high D and scoop it way down and back up, and then take the E flat and scoop it way down and back up. And so if I have longer time to warm up, it'll include that. And I've had some actor/comedians that I've worked with, make fun of that and say, okay, it's time for you to sound like a bleeding sheep since there show's in about 30 minutes. So, yeah, so I've got some notoriety out of that.
Well, since you mentioned saxophone, this question kind of just came to my mind. Every Tuesday, I teach one of my students, Olivia. She's a senior in high school, and she plays in the orchestra and the wind band, but she also plays in the jazz band. And so she plays saxophone for jazz and then flute for the others. And when she comes into lessons, she says, give me 1 second. I was just playing saxophone. I'm really tight. And so her concern I'm seeing week to week is that she's extremely tight in her flute embouchure. Because my knowledge is so minimal in this area, my first gut instinct as a teacher is I think she's biting too hard on the saxophone mouthpiece. Maybe a little bit more tense than she needs to be. And then that's why she's having a hard time going over to flute, where you need to be more forward and, like this kissing poo, face. But is that something that I don't know, because you're
There's
not here.
definitely some problems that can occur.
Okay.
The higher and smaller the saxophone is, the smaller the mouthpiece, and the more damage you're going to do to flute. So as much fun as it is to play soprano sax, because you can kind of play around and make it sound like a Baroque oboe or something like that, that's the one with the tiny mouthpiece that's smaller than the clarinet mouthpiece that can really wear out your lower lip, because you really do have to have some of that pressure of the saxophone mouthpiece on there. Then alto is a little troublesome. And then tenor, I found out, is less so. I always thought, oh, I wouldn't be good at that. That's farther from my main instruments. But it's actually easier to go back to flute from tenor because you're not talking about as much pressure, and the angle also of the tenor mouthpiece, it's not as bad. So assuming the student is playing alto sax, I mean, a really good tip for her might be what I do, and this comes from a sax player friend of mine, Christy, who's also an excellent doubler with flute and clarinet, is you just take a piece of bandage tape and you're putting it on your lower teeth, and then that's protecting from that sharpness of your lower teeth cutting into your lip. And so, what you're doing is you're taking the bandage tape and you're putting it back to back with itself. So the sticky stuff is never going on your teeth. It's back to back with itself. And then you're going to fold it again once you have the shiny side on both sides. Okay. And so, but you still have to find, the right size. How wide do you want it and how deeply down, on your teeth do you want it to go? So that's like a simple thing that costs almost nothing that you can put in your mouth while you're playing a clarinet or a sax that is going to damage your flute muscles a little less.
Okay.
But the thing with the tightness is also, I think part of it for us is a little bit psychological. It's a little bit of fear, like, oh, I was just playing the other instrument. Can I do it? And then you tighten up. So there's that. So probably what your student needs is to, first of all, if there's any way possible time-wise, is to make sure she's doing some good flute warm-ups before she touches the saxophone that day. Just your usual stuff, your Trevor Y warm-ups or your octave slurs that are everybody's flute warm-up and your harmonics, just to do some of that. And then to redo it patiently for a few minutes after you finish playing the reed instrument when you're going back to flute.
Okay. Thank you for that. That helps out a lot. Because not knowing the instrument, I'm just guessing, but to have actual, tangible things that she can do is a lot better than me just saying, well, relax, because that doesn't really help anything. Perfect. So, what resources do you recommend for doublers to check out?
Well, if you just want to talk about how to individually study the instruments, they're really the same resources that you have for those instruments.
Okay.
You probably just need a little more in terms of the tone studies. Like you just need more minutes per day on the octave slurs and harmonics for flute, but it doesn't really matter which book you're reading the octave slurs or harmonics out of. You just want to do them a little bit extra before and possibly after playing the reed instrument. But as far as something for mixing the instruments together, if you're interested in playing musicals, there's a wonderful resource by a guy named Brett Pimentel, where he lists all these Broadway shows and what doubling combinations they have. So shows.brettpimentel.com. And when I checked this yesterday or the day before, he had something like 1,369 shows that he'd researched what the woodwind books were like.
Whoa.
Now, he may be double counting a few that have multiple versions.
Okay.
So, for instance, Music Man has 2 completely different orchestrations that I've played. I've played Music Man 3 times, twice with one orchestration and once with another. So that may count as 2 on his list of 1,369, but it's still a lot of musicals. And so if you hear that somebody's doing something and they're saying, can you play this musical or not? I mean, you can just check that and see, is there a reed book listed that is a good combination for you? One of the problems is you can't see what the proportions are. So they may only want you to pick up that alto flute once, and you don't really have to turn down the job if you don't have an alto flute, or there may be just a few spots on soprano sax that you can figure out how to cover with your alto sax and your clarinet if you don't have a soprano handy. So it's not a be-all and end-all, but it's a very good start to seeing whether that's a musical that has a book that suits you. Some doublers think they can play just any book, but I'm not going to say that of myself. I'm going to define some limitations.
Oh, interesting. Thank you for that resource. That's amazing. Perfect. And so for the fun part, not that this was not fun, this was so much fun, but for the fun part of the show, we do a segment called Picks. Do you have some picks that you would like to share with the listeners today?
Well, you almost stole one of mine when you mentioned playing Seussical, but that is kind of toward the top of my list of musicals that I've liked playing, but it particularly And this has more than one version that I think you'll find in the Pimentel website. But I've played the same version each time I've played it. And it has a book that's piccolo, flute, clarinet, and alto sax. But there's a substantial amount, as you know, of flute and piccolo, to where if that's your strength, you can really shine on it. And yet you're qualified to be hired to play a whole book by yourself, because the sax stuff is not that hard and the clarinet stuff isn't either. And there's not that much clarinet in that book. So that's one of my picks where I can really shine as a doubler because of my flute skills, but I'm still being a doubler. There's enough of the other instruments.
Nice.
Another pick, just because this show is so much fun and I've played more productions of it than any other, is the show we call Spelling Bee, or the 25th annual Putnam County Spelling Bee. And it's a flute, clarinet, sax book that has a teeny bit of oboe that you can deal with different ways if you don't play oboe, like just play most of it on clarinet because it's only 1 or 2 songs. But that one, the reason that one is so much fun is because they bring up 4 people from the audience each night to be spellers along with the cast members that also are spelling words. The cast members are always getting the same clue and the same word, but the audience members, 1, 2, 3, 4, they are not getting those same words each night. They're getting different words from a glossary, and there's also little introductions of introducing the speller. This person is wearing this very dull clothes or something, and so they'll say that they're just about to go shopping for bright colors or something like that. And then you never know what words those people are going to get. So if you're playing a run of the show that goes 4 or 5 or 6 weeks, you're not bored listening when you're not playing, because it's like, what words are there going to be? It's different every night.
Oh, wow.
And that's so much fun for me. So
cool.
That's one of my picks.
The variations keeps it new.
It really keeps it new. You never know what's going to happen.
How fun.
And I guess I'm allowed to say a pick that has nothing to do with music. So because I was coming here today to talk to you on your podcast, I wore my T-shirt from my niece's podcast. And my niece and her boyfriend, who both have degrees in English, have written a sort of like a detective story with different episodes, and it's called Penumbra. So if you Google Penumbra, you'll see my niece's name come up, Sophie Kaner, and she's one of the 2 authors, and she's also one of the actors on that.
Wow. And you were telling us that it's quite popular, and it's pretty big.
It's become very popular, even with substantial listener lists in other countries.
Wow.
Yeah.
Kudos to her.
They're excited about that.
Yeah,
yes.
That's awesome. So my pick is also non-music related, and it's Chinese Mahjong. I don't know if you've ever played.
I haven't.
No, I'm going to have to teach you. It's a 4-person game, so we'll have to grab a 4th person. But it is one of my favorite games I've learned since I was a little girl. I think the first time my mom and dad taught me Chinese Mahjong, I was probably like 3 or 4 years old. And I've been playing ever since. You basically build a wall of china, and you have different sets. It's just like a card game where you either have like 3 of a kind, 4 of a kind, or like sequences. And basically whoever gets the right combination by the end, wins. So, so if you have not tried Chinese Mahjong, I would highly recommend it. And I'll put a link in the show notes where you can purchase a set. There's some really cheap sets on Amazon or eBay for like $30, $40. So you don't have to like go all out and buy the really fancy sets, but there are some more affordable options. So, but thank you so much, Ellen, for
you're more than welcome.
Yeah, your time and your energy and your talents, and thank you for letting me pick your brain. And these exercises and suggestions for students, I know will help them out very much so. So thank you so much.
You're more than welcome. Thanks for having me.
Today's episode is sponsored by J&K Productions. They produce all of my episodes, from adding the intro and outro music to editing the audio and all post-production needs. Contact them for your next podcast project at jkproductions.media. Thank you for listening to the Flute 360 podcast. For more information, please visit HeidiKBegay.com. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please rate and review in the iTunes store. Let's talk about flute.